Good morning. As we come back to moments of hope, I found myself kind of searching for what I was going to say, where I was going to go with this. And I asked Ellen, my wife, I said, hey, do you have any advice for me? You've been kind of watching Matt and Tom do these, and you're pretty good at picking up on what we could do better, or where we could make additional changes. And she looked at me and she just said, be ready. And I said, excuse me? She goes, just be prepared. That's the only advice that I can give you is be prepared. Be yourself in front of the camera, and make sure you smile and don't look down too much, and be prepared. Have an outline, know what you're going to say. I found that, at first I found that a little insulting, like, really, be prepared. But then as I began to let that sober in and begin to think about it, I was like, she's got a point. Just be prepared. Be there and speak what God is telling you to speak. And so, I began to think about that, and I began to think about where we're at as a nation, as a society, as individuals. And it's the same kind of principle and same kind of advice that Ellen gave me this morning. Are we prepared? Are we being prepared for the situations at hand? Or are we looking at this with times of desperation and times of uncertainty? And are we saying, the end is coming and all is lost? Or are we being prepared and ready for what God has in store? Because when everything comes back to a relative norm, are we going to be ready to take up this situation and be ready to get back to whatever that looks like, whether it's going back to work or going back to school or ready to start our sports, or ready to come back to service? As I can't wait to see all of your faces again in a congregation. But are we ready? Are we preparing ourselves in those situations? And it also made me reflect on, if you've been watching with us, our live prayer service. It reminded me of a prayer service that we had just a couple weeks ago. And Tom and Matt, they took the opportunity to walk through, the armor of God. And as they walked through each situation and each piece of the armor, there was one that kind of stood out more than others in this, because, the entire armor is to prepare us and to get us ready for battle and ready for opposition. But I wanted to speak specifically from Ephesians chapter 6, verses 14 and 15 as we look at a couple of pieces of the armor. And this is what it says: stand your ground, putting on the belt of truth and the body armor of God's righteousness. For shoes, put on the peace that comes from the good news, so that you will be fully prepared. As I looked at this passage just again, and as I began to think about that preparedness and that readiness and what it looked like to be able to say, hey, I'm where I need to be and I am ready and I have a sense of peace and a sense of good news, it really made me think about where we're at as a society. It's hard to see good news when there's pandemonium. It's hard to see peace when there's chaos. But God says, hey, if you want to prepare yourself, if you want to be ready, put on the good news that is Christ Jesus. As believers, we have good news. We have news that we don't have to hoard to ourselves like toilet paper, but news that we should be spreading readily and very evident. That good news comes through Christ, through the salvation that only comes through Him. And then on top of that, that gives us a peace. It gives us a understanding that in chaos there is a sense of peace. There's a sense of everything's going to be okay, because God is our source of peace and joy. And so today, I don't know where you're at. I don't know what your life is looking like during these times, but always know this: as a believer, you have good news. You have a gospel that gives you peace, that gives you a sense of preparedness. And the best thing that we can do in this time is, one, be prepared and understand what's going on and be aware. But then also is to share that peace and to be prepared any time and every time to give an account for, hey, this is where my peace and my joy comes from. And it's not from the things around us. It's not from what the news says or when things are going to open back up, but it's directly in correspondence with the good news that is the gospel truth of God. Guys, it's been my pleasure to be with you this morning. God bless and have a great week.